of you who might be newcomers, a big welcome. This is a very dynamic group, and we're so happy to see so many interested folks. This is in a meeting format, so we do ask that during these opening sessions that you go ahead and mute yourself. This is going to be a long meeting. We will have plenty of opportunities for questions throughout, and then a nice big block of time at the end for interactive discussion. And at that point, we absolutely encourage you to flip on your cameras, come off mic, and offer any questions. In the meantime, if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, please drop in your name, your affiliation, where you're calling in from, maybe your favorite body of water, and folks, keep an eye on that and see who else is in the room with you here. If you have any questions about what the speakers are going to be talking about, please feel free to utilize the chat at that point. We will be monitoring it and using that to bring questions up to the speakers as they finish up. Again, thank you for everyone for being here and for your patience. We know this is going to be a long meeting, and we do look forward to some opportunity for interaction at the end. I want to give a huge thanks to the good folks at CPRA for their support of this event, and the Water Institute for everything that they are doing to keep this effort up and running. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and put up the agenda for the call, and we'll walk through all the things we're going to be getting through today. So we're just going to be starting, as I said, with some opening comments, but you're not here to hear from me, so we'll be moving right quickly into hear from Jim Paul from CPRA about Louisiana's interest in coastal carbon. I will then be talking a little bit about the Blue Carbon National Working Group that I coordinate with Restore America's Estuaries. We'll then be moving into some of the highlights of our previous meeting this past May, and all the things that we learned in some of the lively discussion there, and how we're using that as a foundation for what this working group will be able to do. We will then hear from folks at the Water Institute about some information sharing platforms that they have up and running. We very much want to hear from you all about what you want to see from that, because this is meant to be something useful to this group and all of your colleagues, students, clients, and so forth. We'll then be talking about our next meeting, which is coming up at GomCon next month. I can't believe it's almost February. And then, as I said, we'll conclude with some open discussion. So with that, why don't we move ahead? And Jim, are you ready to go?
I believe so.
Very good. I'd like to introduce Jim Paul with CPRA. Go right ahead.
Great. Thanks, Hillary. And good morning, everybody. I'm looking at the people counter continuing to increase. So this is great. Thanks everybody for joining us for this conference or conversation. So this is going to be short. I just wanted to start this with just a short discussion of kind of what's brought Louisiana to the table with regard to coastal carbon, and mainly from the standpoint that we're currently using the state interest to drive this working group. Certainly not exclusively, but it is, where we're at right now. So next slide, please. So just from a brief outline, really all I'm going to talk about are just kind of a quick summary of the drivers of considering coastal carbon in Louisiana, and then actually start getting into some of our considerations. So next slide. And starting with the drivers. Next slide. So really driving it, considerations of coastal carbon from the standpoint of Louisiana and from the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority is really one kind of that we were told to, I say that a little bit flippantly, but You see here the state executive order from 2020 under the previous administration with regard to the Climate Initiatives Task Force, which established a greenhouse gas emissions net zero strategy by 2050. And so part of our overall interest in coastal carbon is whether the activities of the coastal program, restoration, risk reduction, and resource management in general can serve as a contribution to that strategy. Next slide. And then secondly is our coastal master plan, which I think a lot of you are familiar with. For those of you who are not, the state and CPRA develops a coastal master plan, our plan towards what we believe would get us to a sustainable coast from a land loss and storm resilience standpoint over a 50-year period. So you're looking at the latest plan, which we just generated last year. The issue is that our strategy on the Coastal Master Plan is a 50-year, $50 billion strategy. But as has been reported fairly well in the press over the past year or two, next slide, is that we're facing a little bit of a fiscal cliff in terms of being able to accomplish that strategy. We've been very much a beneficiary, like the other Gulf states, of having a lot of money coming in for restoration, risk reduction, and resilience efforts ever since the 2010 Deepwater Horizon oil spill. But a lot of those programs, the funding programs associated with that, sourced, say, through the Natural Resources Damage Assessment or the Restore Council or the National Fish and Wildlife Federation, based on the criminal and civil penalties from the oil spill, sunset in 2032. And so you see, just an example of what that looks like for FY23 and FY24. The blues, the dark blue there, are Deepwater Horizon funds that sort of all disappear by the time we get to 2032. And so the exploration from that standpoint on coastal carbon is really just a question of whether we can diversify some of our funding sources to be able to support implementation of the master plan. Next slide. So then sort of where our heads are right now with regard to CPRA considerations for coastal carbon. Next slide. Coming off of that executive order, again, that established the Climate Initiatives Task Force, it also mandated the development of a climate action plan, which the state published in 2022. You see the cover for that document here. That document actually covers, I guess, multiple, I'm just going to call them sectors from a carbon standpoint: transportation, industry, et cetera. But the focus for us right now is on the natural working lands and wetlands chapter. Next slide. And from a so you see some of the strategy discussions captured here from that chapter, and specifically, next slide. Under here, this strategy 15, which is restore and conserve Louisiana's coastal wetlands to maximize climate mitigation and adaptation goals. And within that strategy, next slide, are these three actions, which I don't even need to put my glasses on to be able to read. So optimize carbon sequestration potential of Louisiana's coastal wetlands by implementing the Coastal Master Plan. Quantify and monitor the potential carbon in Louisiana habitats, and then developing a crediting mechanism and market specific to Louisiana blue carbon. Next slide. And that's something I want to take a moment to talk about. on the idea of us really referring to this effort going forward as coastal carbon, I just wanted to clarify the difference. A lot of y'all are probably familiar with the concept of blue carbon, which traditionally has been the more saline environments, both open water as well as, say, saline emergent wetlands. But just to point out, within the state's inventory and within CPRA's portfolio, of all of the coastal wetlands in coastal Louisiana, and here in this figure, we're looking at the browns, the green, magenta, red, and blue colors in this map for the emergent wetlands. Fully 66% estimated of our coastal wetland, emergent wetland portfolio is actually swamp and fresh marsh. And at this point, what we are driving towards is a focus on all of these habitats. CPR is just not in a position right now to want to leave 66% of our potential carbon stock on the table just because of past focuses on seagrass, mangroves, and salt marshes. Next slide. So from that standpoint, where we're at right now is that we're just working through a number of uncertainties associated with trying to bridge the idea of capturable carbon or translating capturable carbon into potential creditable carbon. So this kind of consideration starts with just an estimate of total capturable carbon. And that's all of our activities, as you see here, kind of excerpted from the master plan, all of our risk reduction and restoration projects that would represent opportunities to either increase or maintain carbon stocks that would otherwise be lost as the sea level rise in the future is really threatening to result in a substantial loss in our coastal wetlands. Next slide. Well, and actually, before we can stay here, but from that, on that front, we've been working with a number of partners, including the Water Institute, over the past probably 10 years or so, to work on those quantifications and estimations of that total capturable carbon. So we've been working on I guess to call it a calculator, because it seems to be sort of a popular term in the coastal carbon or carbon realm right now. Also developing the empirical science to really inform those calculators. But also, getting back to this slide then, we do recognize that total capturable carbon starts getting winnowed down before we can get to creditable carbon. One of the important funnels here are policy, legal, and programmatic limitations, including the two terms that nobody ever really wants to see, the additionality and permanence issues. Then also funding program issues. We have, for instance, in Louisiana, 28 programs that fund our activities in the coastal zone. And that's the full range of risk reduction, resilience, and restoration activities. Not all of those programs allow for carbon credits to be developed off of the projects that they fund. Some do, and so we are currently working through some cooperators with Plosha & Carr, Stantec, and the Water Institute to really get a sense as to what programs do and don't allow credit development. Why don't they? In the case for those who don't, is it legal? Is it programmatic? And does that give us direction going forward of, say, where we need to concentrate additional scientific endeavors as well as other activities? Also, we've got issues with ownership of credits in program funded actions. Not just say, does the funder, own some of those, but a lot of you are probably aware that Louisiana is different than, say, the other 4 Gulf states from the standpoint of ownership of the intertidal wetlands that about 80% of our intertidal wetlands in Louisiana are privately owned. And so as we move forward towards development of anything to be able to credit work in the intertidal, that becomes a big issue for us. So that refines the estimate down to, say, capturable carbon. Next slide. The next couple of steps, we can, next slide, please, we also start having to winnow out construction carbon costs. So this is the carbon that's generated as we put these risk reduction and resilience and restoration projects on the ground, to be able to get to a net carbon as defining it here. We then can compare the market price of those credits to give us an potential estimated value of our net carbon footprint. And then we have to compare that to our estimated cost to monitor, particularly if those monitoring costs are over and above what we normally do, as well as then management of those credits. And this gives us a sense then of, well, if the net carbon value is greater than the estimated cost to monitor and manage, that argues, I think, from a harder effort from the state to develop an agency-led approach for credits. Whereas if the monitoring and management costs are greater, then maybe the agency is in a better position to really support outside-led approaches for credit development programs, and then also to explore whether or not we can still define our projects as contributions to any carbon strategy that may or may not be continued in the new administration. Next slide. And just for everybody's benefit, for the 90 people that are on the call today, what I've done here is just highlighted those boxes where I think we see where the Gulf of Mexico Coastal Carbon Working Group plugs in, what information helps us work through this, and it's everything from the science going into the capturable carbon to the policy and programmatic limitations, the construction carbon costs, market price, and as well as the monitoring and management. So, we've been definitely interested in a diverse working group that tackles multiple fronts on coastal carbon. And so, just again, wanted to give a sense that we're very much saying that we're hoping to rely on the working group to help inform our considerations, and then, any sharing of our considerations with the other 4 Gulf states going forward. I think that's my last slide. Next. Yep. So thank you for your time. Again, thanks for everybody who's on this. Again, the attendance here is great today, so I'm very happy to see that. Got my contact information below or below on this slide, and so feel free to reach out to me as well. I will definitely be, for those of you who will be joining us in the in-person working group meeting on Monday, February 19th. I'll be there for that as well, and we'll be happy to have some follow-up with you all then. So again, thank you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Jim. And at this point, we probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. If anyone has questions that they would like to ask Jim about his work, about CPRA's role here, or any of the things that he just talked about, please go ahead and drop them in the chat. Again, we've got just a couple of minutes before we'll be moving into the next section of the meeting. So I will give it a minute if anyone would like to drop anything in the chat. For those of you that have just come in, my name is Hillary Stevens. I work work with Restore America's Estuaries. I'm based in Washington, D.C., and I work with a national blue carbon program and have been partnering with a number of different organizations to promote this regional collaboration. So I am thrilled to be facilitating this meeting this morning and to welcome you all. This turnout is absolutely fantastic. So really pleased that you all could join us. The first question that comes in, Jim, if you're ready to take this one on, where is the new administration on these challenges? You want to take that one?
Yeah, no, I actually just saw that in the chat. We don't know. I think that's a TBD. I think our at this point, what we are trying to establish is an opportunity for both the agency as well as for the private sector partners to be able to claim carbon credits, tradable carbon credits on the open market from their activities in the coastal zone. So, we'll have to. Some of you may have heard when we were just getting on earlier, I'd made mention of today's a big day. For those of you in Louisiana, you may have seen some of the news reporting that we're actually getting today, this morning, an announcement on our new leadership from the coastal program standpoint. And so these will be questions that or conversations that will push up the line with our new leadership, and we'll see. I totally don't know exactly where the administration stands on this right now.
All right, thank you. I don't know if we can get any bigger question than that. So I think we will go ahead and move on to the next section. One interesting component of this meeting, and as we are pulling together this working group, is that this is just one of several blue carbon collaborative groups around the country. And we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other things that are going on. And I will start briefly with a few remarks about the Blue Carbon National Working Group that Ray has coordinated for going on a decade now. This goes back to the early days of understanding what blue carbon is and trying to bring together the community of practice of folks that were researchers and project implementers, trying to figure out what is the science behind blue carbon and how might we use this to better promote conservation and restoration and better management of coastal resources. So we started pulling folks together. Our first meeting of this working group was in 2015. At that time, it was about 30 people that came together in Washington, D.C. to talk about the state of the field and what were the gaps in research and in knowledge? What could we do to better promote understanding of blue carbon? That we met with the group again in 2018, and again, it was about 36 people. The 2020 meeting was postponed. Eventually, we held it virtually in 2021. That meeting was, again, 30 some odd folks from around the country with expertise in this space. And that meeting focused largely on policy needs. What is the role of the federal government in promoting blue carbon? And from that meeting, Ray produced a white paper of some policy recommendations that we have been promoting since that time, working with agencies and elected officials to promote what we see as a productive and facilitating role of the federal government in this space. Where do we want federal policy? Where do we not want the federal government going? And to try and move in that direction. We've also done a lot of work to promote the methodologies in the carbon markets, as well as additional looking at policy issues. For example, we had some legal research done to look at blue carbon projects on public land, whether that's state or federally owned. There have been some movement at the state level in a couple of different states to promote carbon projects on state-owned land, but this is still remains a challenge in many places. So The latest on the Blue Carbon National Working Group is that we just had a virtual meeting last week on the 24th that was quite large. About 150 people came through that meeting. Again, lots of opportunity for discussion to bring folks together from around the country, from different sectors and different working areas, to share knowledge, to talk about some of the really difficult challenges that we're facing in this field, whether that be carbon fluxes or trying to sort out legal issues. We are hoping to host an in-person meeting in Washington, D.C. in May. For any of you who might be interested in attending that, do feel free to follow up with me. We are still working on the agenda, but word about that will be going out. So watch this space. Feel free to follow up with me about it. But in relation to this group, that is a national working group with the idea of looking at what's going on at the national level. What is the role of the federal government? What types of research can be done that might be applicable nationwide? However, one of the things that we have all run up against is that much of the scientific understanding in this space is really place-based. You cannot compare data from Maine to data from Alabama. It simply doesn't work. There are too many different ecosystem differences to make that feasible. Consequently, there's a lot of work to be done at the regional level where folks working in more comparable systems can interact with each other to make sure that their work is complementing each other. And so we are also working to support and foster regional working groups. There is a longstanding regional working group in the Pacific Northwest that has been working together at the regional level for a number of years now. There are a lot of academics in that working group, and it is largely focused on research, but it is one example of a highly effective regional working group. And I'm here today because I want to see this group grow and thrive. So I'm here to listen and learn, as well as to support and bring what lessons learned I have from other areas. So feel free to follow up with me at the end if you have any questions or interest in getting involved at the national level. But with that, I will wrap my remarks, and I'd like to invite Laura Stieghorst to come up and talk about this organization, what's going on here and what we can expect.
Hi, thank you so much, Hillary, for that introduction. Once again, my name is Laura Stieghorst. I'm here along with George Hsu, who's also in the meeting, and we're co-leading the Gulf of Mexico Regional Working Group. Like Hillary said, there's a lot of information that cannot be shared between regions, and we're representing ocean, carbon, and biogeochemistry. Many of you might know them as OCB. And this is a recent effort to expand on their findings from their annual national meeting. And what they found is that many of the discussions are place-based, and they're really dependent on the locality. So they broke us out into 6 regions, and George and I will be leading the Gulf of Mexico regional node. This, like I said, is a recent effort. So the foundation of our group is a sense of reciprocity. So you get in what you get out, what you put in. We're very excited to engage all of our members and really keep an active and productive group. We're also keeping in mind a respect for the commons and respect for our environment, and the idea that we're here to build community above all else. So we're really excited to bring that community together. If you'll go to the next slide, for the first time at OSM. Unfortunately, there are 2 conferences for this group of people at the same time. So we'll be represented at Ocean Sciences meeting on February 19th. We'll be having our first kickoff meeting. And the goal of this is really to understand who our members are, what access to resources they have, what their special talents are, and bring people together for the first time. So if you happen to be at Ocean Sciences meeting in February, we would love to have you there. On the next slide, Here is a QR code that you can scan to submit your information if you're interested in joining the regional working group. We focus on more than just blue carbon, but all things marine carbon dioxide removal. So this will be including ocean alkalinity enhancement, seaweed cultivation, and other physical methods of removing carbon from the atmosphere and the ocean. So please, if you're interested, this is our interest form, and we'll be following up with more details about that meeting at OSM. And if anybody has questions now, we have a few minutes to take them.
Thank you so much, Laura. Yeah, this is truly unfortunate timing, that some of us will be in New Orleans and some of us will be in Tampa. Lovely locales both, but unfortunately you can't be in two places at once. So I will be at GomCon, and I'm very sorry to miss this gathering. But for anyone who is interested in following up, again, this meeting is recorded, so we'll have access to that QR code, and we'll make sure that you know where to find these folks if you are going to be attending the Ocean Sciences meeting. We do have a couple of minutes for questions. If anybody has any questions for Laura or myself, feel free to drop them in the chat. We've got another couple of minutes before moving on, but again, you know where to find us if you would like to follow up with either of these groups following the meeting. I'll give it another minute for the chat.
I'll also add that if you can't make the meeting, but you have interest in getting more information about our group, that QR code will add you to our mailing list, and we'll be able to keep in contact.
And George is also reminding everyone that you do not need to be registered attending the Ocean Sciences meeting to join this gathering. It is off-site. So if you are in that area but not planning to pay and register to go to the meeting, you are still welcome to attend. We've got a request about the QR code. Jean, would you be able to go back a slide? There we go. Thank you.
I also will note here that we will be creating a PDF of this slide deck and posting it in a place that we'll note to you in a few moments. So there'll be another way to be able to access things like the QR code.
Great, thank you. Okay, and if there are no other questions, then I think we will move on to the next section of the meeting, which is a recap. Perfect. Thank you, George. So the QR code is now dropped into the chat, so you know where to find it. That's great. Thank you. The next section of the meeting will be a recap of the fantastic workshop that we had at State of the Coast in New Orleans last May. That was a big kickoff and an opportunity for folks to come together and talk about their interest in building this collaboration. And so at this point, I will turn it over to Jean Cohen of the Water Institute to talk about highlights of the May 23 meeting.
Great. Thanks so much, Hillary. And thanks again to Laura and George as well for highlighting a complementary effort that's going on. So as Hillary said, we actually did host an earlier meeting with the Gulf of Mexico Coastal Carbon Working Group back in May. That was a result of some great vision that CPRA had put together and had put into motion well over a year ago now, to get together a coastal carbon working group to meet some of the goals that Jim pointed out in his earlier presentation. We did establish it with an eye towards making a space for a diversity of stakeholders and experts to collaborate to realize the mission of collaboratively and strategically addressing critical science gaps and policy needs associated with developing coastal carbon as a conservation and management tool for northern Gulf of Mexico ecosystems. And just to get a little more specific about that geographic range, the northern was there to distinguish that we really are focusing on the US Gulf Coast at this point. I'll also point out that we are interested in not only gathering together researchers, but also the resource managers, the end users, policy and legal experts, other stakeholders like the landowners, industry leaders, because we want to make sure that we are bringing together a diversity of expertise needed to address these issues to realize this mission. And I'm really excited to say that we've got a pretty good diversity in the meeting today, so I'm really excited about that. As we said, we held the kickoff meeting of this group on May 30th of last year, the beginning of the State of the Coast Conference. We had over 80 people attend in person with a nice diversity of representation there from government, academic, private, NGO, and other community leaders. And that diversity of expertise of researchers, decision makers, policy experts, attorneys, resource managers. We have some land managers there as well. So it was a nice diversity of people. The objectives of that meeting were to reach consensus on the need for a Gulf Coastal Carbon Working Group, establish interest in participating, receive feedback on the mission, objectives, and geographic scope, and to begin discussion of research priorities and critical information gaps and set expectations for future engagements. These are examples of some materials that we had drafted to facilitate the conversation in May. I don't expect you to be able to read that draft charter. The QR code that's listed here takes you to a PDF of that if you're interested in reading it. I will say that it's probably already a little bit dated, but it's a place for us to continue the conversation. And then on the left here, you see a diagram that we put together of a vision of what the critical science needs are and how they lead into the development of an accreditation framework. In terms of participant input, with such a large and diverse group, we had a lot of really good input. I'm just highlighting a few key things here. First of all, in terms of the establishment of a working group, one of the important things that we heard was there needs to be a champion organization to sustain the working group. Without that sort of driver behind it, it does kind of die on the vine. So we appreciate that CPRA has invested, at least for this year, to keep this working group moving forward. They also identified the importance of targeting the science needs and potential pathways to fill knowledge and data gaps, and providing opportunities for in-depth discussions of critical science, legal, and policy needs and opportunities. Although we were together for, I think it was 2.5 or 3 hours that day, we really only scratched the surface of that conversation. So in terms of communication and collaboration, people said it was really important to identify the end users. And in this particular case, we're responding to the needs of CPRA. But with it being the Gulf Coastal Carbon Working Group, if there are other states, other agencies, other end users out there, we'd really be interested in hearing people's thoughts on how this might apply beyond the state of Louisiana. There was an emphasis on working with landowners, industry, and other stakeholders to understand their perspectives on these needs and their concerns. Important to ensure common use and understanding of terms, because we are throwing out a lot of terms and acronyms and things like that we all want to make sure we know what each other is saying. And an importance of creating and maintaining a collaboration or resource platform, and then build upon other platforms as appropriate. So the bottom line of a go or no go on this, there was a high level of interest in developing the working group and organizing a collaboration hub. And as I mentioned, that desire for future meeting formats that allow for more structured input and communication. So we're excited that this is one step along the way. Again, we know that there's there's these other working groups that are formulating out there. And so continuing to, be aware of the goals and objectives that each working group is doing and finding those points of intersection and strong coordination and collaboration going forward is something that we really want to make sure that we're creating a space for. So comments from folks out there.
All right, thank you, Jean. At this point, we do have a few minutes for questions. I know some of you would have been at that meeting in May, but many probably weren't. And so if you have any questions about the outcomes of that or sort of where you see this trajectory of this going, this is an opportunity. Please go ahead and utilize the chat there if you have any questions for Jean about the sort of outcomes of that meeting or the structure and support of what we anticipate moving forward. All right, I'll give it just a minute, but we may be all set in this front. All right, thank you, Jean. So at this point, we can go ahead and move on to talk about one of the big needs that came out of that meeting, and I think we all recognize is a need to develop an organized place for sharing information to make sure that all of the research that's being done within this region is accessible to colleagues and partners. And so Jean and Jessica at this point are going to talk about information sharing needs and opportunities. So Jean, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thanks, Hillary. So again, coming out of that May meeting, one of the big things that came forward as a need if we are going to be as effective as possible in collaborating on this topic is to have a collaboration space. So what we've created here is a SharePoint site. It's an initial collaboration space. The main features that we have available on the SharePoint site is a discussion board, as well as a place to hold documents. The site is accessible by invitation only. So if you're interested in joining the SharePoint site, I would ask that you send an email to this email address, gccwg@thewaterinstitute.org, and we will get you access to that collaboration space as well as give you some instructions on how to navigate it, because if anybody is used to working in Microsoft Teams, sometimes it can be a little interesting to work through. So we've got some instruction guides here. I will say that with respect to the features at the moment, this is a framework. This is a somewhat blank slate for you all to be able to make it a space that's usable for you. We do have a few documents that we've already uploaded into that documents folder. We're going to be uploading a few more things like the presentation from today and some other important things. We're working on a glossary of terms, a glossary of acronyms, things like that. But I will say that as you start using the space, if you have additional documents that you want to be able to share with one another, and you don't have a link to another location that you can just drop into the discussion board, you can send an email to that email address, and then we can get those documents uploaded as well. So as I said, this really is intended to be a temporary platform, an initial collaboration space while we're working with you to better understand what the longer term needs might be. So at the Water Institute, to let you know how we're going to start soliciting that input from you.
Great. Thanks, Jean. As Jean was saying, the SharePoint site really is a temporary collaboration space, but we'd love to see you all use it, and we'd love to hear your feedback about what's working and what's not. But we really do want to address the longer term information sharing needs and figure out what the priorities are, because what we want to do is make sure that we create a space that facilitates ongoing engagement and creation of long-term partnerships and collective action that we all want to see take place. So to that end, think of this as an invitation to sort of help mold and shape the working group and the ways that its members work together. We want to make sure that whatever collaboration space we dream up is valuable enough to have the working group members come back time and time again, have enough engaging content, have enough engaging members and discussion so that it is a living space and not necessarily just a sort of placeholder on the internet. So we invite you to think about how you want to engage and tell us sort of what the best ways to enable that engagement might be. So to do that, we're going to be sending out a survey by the end of the week. And there are some example questions here. So we're looking to really understand, how will this facilitate the working groups work together? How will this working group space be distinct from others? We've talked about other platforms that are already and groups that are already existing and working. What information sharing will facilitate the working group's progress the most? What are the priorities? What are the most important things that we need to sort of get out there first? Is it internal communication between the working group members or external public communication that's most important? Is it about the discussion boards, or is it about education, or is it a mix of both? And should we consider building upon and partnering with other platforms and other partners, such as the GOMA Open Data Platform and the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center? There are plenty of other platforms and partners. Is there good synergy? So we'll be sending out a survey to all of the meeting registrants here, but that link will be shareable. So please do share with your networks. We are really looking to hear as much input from the field as we can. And those results will sort of be synthesized and shared and discussed in the GomCon meeting on February 19th in Tampa. And ultimately, what we're going to do is take the information from the survey and the discussion on the 19th, in addition to some future focus groups and potential surveys, because we want to make sure that we are hearing from all of the diverse stakeholders that play a part in this ecosystem. And we'll take all of that, we'll synthesize that, and we'll make an informed recommendation to CPRA and sort of hope that the working group and its needs can be met in whatever we might come up with next.
All right, thank you both so much. To everyone, this is a real opportunity. Do some deep thinking about, what do you have to share, and what in the way of resources do you have that you want to put out into the world, and what are your needs? What type of information would be helpful for you to have access to from other folks working in your region? Again, whether that's your clients or your students or whomever else you're working with, what resources would benefit them that you would have better access to, and other parameters to think about. For example, what about tracking metadata? What about publicly funded research versus information that maybe not ready for prime time, but you want to get someone else's feedback on? There are lots and lots of parameters that go into data sharing that can either facilitate or put up some speed bumps. And we really want to hear what are the challenges that you're facing, what information would be helpful. Any feedback is welcome. So please do, if you have questions at this point for Jean and Jessica, go ahead and drop them into the chat. If you have feedback about what you think would make a really whiz-bang data sharing situation, let us know. We want to hear all about it. I do have one question that's come in. How do you think this might fit into the infrastructure law's climate ready coast? Jean, I think that was meant for you. Do you have thoughts there?
I will say that I will defer to someone else in the group. I might cold call on Megan if you have thoughts on that. You or Amanda. They're Megan Terrell and Amanda Carr with Pelosi and Carr, who are also contractors to CPRA on this effort.
Yeah, thanks, Jean. This is Megan Terrell. So I'd probably need to take a closer look. I'm familiar with the Climate Ready Coast sort of on a high level, but not deep into the weeds. I will say that one of the things and one of the issues that we've come across in thinking about the legal and policy issues around coastal carbon is the fact that this administration and with the bipartisan infrastructure law, there is this big focus on coastal issues, on nature-based resources, nature-based projects. But they don't, as far as I can see so far, they haven't quite gone far enough to completely incorporate and adopt the concept of coastal carbon or any markets around coastal carbon. So I think there need to be continued conversations with the relevant federal agencies as they work through all of the monies that are available in the infrastructure law and in the Climate Ready Coast and try to incorporate the concepts around coastal carbon. And so I think this group and some of the work coming out of both the work that CPRA is doing and the state is doing and the other regional entities collectively can try to, to the extent that we can get in front of some of these federal agencies and have open conversations around what does coastal carbon look like? How does that interplay into the various different policies of the federal government? And do they need to adopt additional policies, guidance documents, regulations around the idea of not just coastal carbon, but other ecosystem markets, other decarbonization efforts generally, and coastal infrastructure projects in ways that will help advance those projects. Whereas right now, the focus is on advancing those projects, but there are some holes and gaps in the federal policies that I think need to be worked on.
Okay, thank you. The questioner goes on and says, so we are lacking a framework to catalyze IRA and the infrastructure law?
I think for this particular issue, we are. I don't know that the answer to that is yes generally, but for coastal carbon, other ecosystem markets, and then more generally, getting some of the infrastructure projects and what we like to call less the traditional infrastructure, but the environmentally beneficial projects and all of the funding that exists in these laws, getting those on the ground faster, I think is something that still is going to require some effort on the guidance and programs and policies so that we're not missing the opportunity that's provided in the infrastructure law.
Okay, thank you. That was great. Are there other questions from the field about these data sharing opportunities, feedback or recommendations or questions about what they are proposing? Okay, I'm not seeing a lot coming in. Thank you so much, Jean and Jessica. Really appreciate it. At this time, we'll be moving on to a preview of the meeting that is scheduled, the workshop that is scheduled to happen on Monday afternoon, February 19th. That is the day prior to when GomCon gets underway. So those of you who will be in Tampa at that time, we welcome you to join us. I'll get into it more later, but what you'll need to do when you register for GomCon, there's an option to add on these optional workshops that are happening on Monday. And again, this one is Monday afternoon. So with this, I will hand it over to Tim, who's going to talk about what we'll be doing at that meeting.
Excellent. Thank you, Hillary. I really appreciated hearing from Hillary and then Laura and George on the other national and regional carbon discussions that are going on at the moment. And it's clear by the number of people on this call that there's currently very high need and interest of applying science into this space and the current, evolution and thinking around carbon. So it's exciting to hear about these multiple efforts, and I think it makes it important for us to clarify what are the goals and objectives and of these different efforts, so that we can all partition input and effort appropriately. So one of the key goals of the in-person meeting in Tampa is specifically to refine that for this particular working group. As Jean clarified, the primary high-level goal of this particular group is tightly focused on meeting CPRA's needs and the state directives that Jim outlined for us earlier in this meeting. So the in-person workshop in Tampa will be an important step to really winnow down what those needs in science and policy are, what are the priorities to help the state move forward. So far for that meeting, there's over 30 people have signed up, and as Hilary said, we'll provide some more information later. Everybody's welcome to that meeting on February the 19th, so there's still time to sign up. Okay, so I'm going to briefly walk through the plan of the process on that day and just a little bit of the process of how we plan to winnow down, if you like, those ideas. And so that'll be through three topics or 3 steps to winnow down what will be the path forward, or the roadmap, if you like. So the first one is starting at the policy and legal level. So is to identify to ultimately get to identifying targeted research needs and how to fill them. First of all, what are the current legal policy constraints and opportunities for blue carbon? And so to do that, we've also established a legal and policy expert panel. So they'll be leading us through that, providing some input and having discussion in terms of how that relates through to the science. And I think so that legal policy framework and needs and potential paths forward will be a fundamental set of guide rails that is where the following science discussions will occur. So next slide, please. So to provide that targeted science then, we'll go through an interactive process of looking at the methodologies and assumptions that are currently available to meet known science policy needs, the current methodologies and potential future methodologies for quantifying carbon and greenhouse gas flux. We'll use a conceptual ecological model approach, and there's an example here on the screen, to interactively prioritise where the greatest uncertainties are. And if we can go to the next slide, please. So an example of that might look like, here's a conceptual ecological model of calculating net greenhouse gas flux for, in this case, a brackish herbaceous marsh. So some of these fluxes and pools are well known, there's good data availability, and then some of them have very high uncertainty. So working across the coast and the different habitats that Jim was talking about being important for CPRA, considering their aerial extent on the coast, we'll identify where the largest science gaps and uncertainties are. And this will allow, once there's a subset of these very high and high uncertainties, we'll be able to go through a process of identifying which of those have the greatest sensitivity and therefore the greatest opportunity in refining our quantification and improving our quantifications of greenhouse gas flux across the state. Okay, and the next slide, please. All right, so then the third conversation, and this links back to what we've just been hearing about, is how can this group collaboratively help to meet those needs, those targeted needs, and what infrastructure, if you like, is needed to help get there in terms of sharing data, having common conversations, and then also being able to get feedback as to when each of those targeted knowledge gaps has been met. So when is there enough information? When is it possible to refine some of the assumptions and methodologies for calculating greenhouse gas and supporting policy and legal advancement and providing science to do that. And finally, the last slide, this is just an overview. So again, so that in-person workshop will walk explicitly through steps of starting with the legal and policy needs to set the guardrails, then working through known methodologies and potential calculation approaches to meet those needs and support the methodologies to quantify carbon and support them, and then finally talk through what what does the community, the science community, this blue carbon community see as needed tools and support mechanisms to have a discussion, to collate needed data, and then to be able to really support the state of Louisiana in improving pathways for blue carbon accreditation for tidal wetlands and fresh marshes. So thank you, Hilary. That's a quick walkthrough of our high-level plan for the day.
All right, very good. Thank you, Tim. So I know I'm looking forward to that meeting. At this point, again, I'll put it out for questions. If anyone has any questions for Tim about what to expect at the meeting at GomCon, now's your chance. If you have any feedback about what you think would be useful, in addition, we're welcome, open to that as well. I do see a question about CERC, and I'm going to go ahead and hold that until we have a larger Q&A session coming up. So again, any questions for Tim and the rest of the team about the meeting coming up in February, the workshop at the beginning of GomCon? And again, I will mention, it is my understanding, please correct me, hey, good times. It is my understanding that in order to attend that workshop, you do need to register for GomCon, and it is an option on the registration site that you can add on to attend this workshop on Monday afternoon, and then the regularly scheduled GomCon sessions start, I think, at 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning. So if you are interested in attending that one, first of all, you can just Google GomCon if you don't know where to find it, but go to the GOMA website and look up events, and all of the information about venue and scheduling and so forth is there. As we mentioned, unfortunately, it is happening at the exact same time as the Ocean Sciences meeting in New Orleans, where I expect a number of you will be as well. Okay, somebody's piping in saying you can just register for the Monday meeting. Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. I didn't realize that. Thank you for that comment.
Yeah, just to add on to that, Hilary, if you just want to attend the workshop on Monday, because we are using space that GOMA has secured at the Tampa Convention Center, there is a $50 registration fee if you're just attending workshops on Monday. And then I think it's $300 or $350 if you're attending the entire week. So
okay, great.
We're not charging for your participation in the workshop, but we are renting space that GOMA has secured. So.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. And it looks like Laura just dropped the link into the chat. So anyone who is interested, please take a look at the chat, and there's the connection to get registered to be there. Okay, and at this point, we're going to sort of transition into an open Q&A and discussion portion of the meeting. If you have questions for Tim and the team, then please do continue to drop them in the chat. At this point, we are going to go ahead and open a mural as well. If anyone has comments or feedback, they are welcome to use this. And at this point, I will take questions for any of the speakers that we have heard from today. Okay, so Jean just dropped a link into the chat. This is for an external window that will open up in your browser, that will open up let's see, we'll open up a mural in your browser, and this is a place where you can write in comments that we can get into a discussion in whatever format you'd like. This is just an alternative way of communicating that can add to the meeting that we have here. I'll be sort of watching that and bringing it in as we go, and at this point, I will go ahead and start taking some of the questions that are coming into the chat. So the first one, Smithsonian Environmental Research Center already created the Coastal Carbon Network years ago, and the network has been quite active. Are you aware of the Coastal Carbon Network, and how would you position this working group in the coastal carbon field? Jessica, would you like to take that one? Or Jean?
Actually, I think I would defer to Jean, but yes, we are very aware of them and we have had previous conversations with them. We know that they are very active. They have a lot of information on their site and their members are very, they work in close collaboration. We've had conversations with them. We would love to find ways to partner with them and build off of their platforms if we can find the funding to do so. And if that is what the working group here thinks is best. So we're definitely aware. We would love to hear from you in terms of how we would position ourselves, either, you know, alongside or as somewhat distinct from that group. We definitely have some thoughts, but we want to hear from you all. Jean, what would you add to that?
I have nothing to add, Jess. I think that was a good synopsis of where we stand with things. Thank you.
Yeah, nobody archives things like the Smithsonian. So we definitely recognize their expertise in that space. And it's actually from conversations with the good folks at CERC that made me comment on the issue of metadata. That is one thing that they do extraordinarily well because they are Smithsonian and they have extraordinary attention to detail about archiving and the importance of data accuracy, data ownership, and keeping track of things in the long term. This element that we're working on here is something much more sort of constrained in its scope than what they have going on, but we certainly aim to complement the work that they're doing. And again, very much look forward to hearing from you about how you think that might best be accomplished. What do you think they do well? And so we don't need to duplicate versus maybe is lacking in something that is so much bigger in its scale. Okay, next question. I guess you will cover this at GomCon, but I can't attend that workshop. So what levels of uncertainties does the carbon standard or other financing support mechanisms require? Again, what levels of uncertainties? And where does science and monitoring stand in relation to those requirements? Anyone prepared to take that one? Tim,
Yeah,
go for it.
Start for sure. Thank you for the question. So this is a pivotal question. So firstly, just to note that VM24 CPRA was behind the development of VM24 in Louisiana. So that was the basis then of developing VM33, which is the seagrass and wetlands standard. But as we've talked through this over the last years, I mean, it's very clear that VM33 has not certified any herbaceous tidal wetlands at this point. And so that's one of the needs, the urgent needs for this discussion is what's the opportunity to get through to a financially viable mechanism to potentially certify the herbaceous wetlands, especially the salinity variable wetlands across coastal Louisiana. One great opportunity is that VM33 is currently being updated, and so that's an opportunity. And I would say that that particular methodology and in terms of the calculations that are used in there has been one of the core, along with the EPA methodologies that CPRA has been using to think about this discussion. And so in terms of the uncertainty there, there's some that are clearly highly uncertain. And so, for example, lateral flux. So when an emergent marsh erodes to open water, the current assumptions in there are, for example, that 75% of the below ground biomass in the top 1 metre essentially transitions immediately to the atmosphere, and 100% of the above ground biomass transitions immediately to the atmosphere as well. Now, there is cases where that can be true, but that's most certainly a very conservative assumption. And so we clearly know that's definitely not the case throughout all of the locations in coastal Louisiana or other tidal wetlands where they're moving from emergent marsh to open water. So that's an example of something that currently at a coast-wide scale or across these different habitats has a very high degree of uncertainty as to what happens with that carbon, and therefore likely has big opportunity, or it's the calculations of net greenhouse gas flux are very sensitive to that assumption. So if that assumption can be refined and then applied in a more refined way, that's a very helpful example of something that potentially has a lot of opportunity to use science and data to improve the accuracy and potentially the amount of carbon that can be included as potentially certifiable within the standard. So it's going to be by necessity a back and forth of trying to identify what some of the uncertainties are, where there's lack of science, can it be improved, and what's the opportunity in terms of sensitivity within the calculations to those updates. Yeah, so hopefully that provides at least a framework of the thinking. And so some of that is identifying those priority areas will be the first step at the workshop. And I will say, for those that can't be at the workshop, we will certainly, I'm just going to risk saying this with the other facilitators on the call, but we will have a mechanism where it's possible to provide input on what some of those priorities might be after the workshop as well. So, you know, we'll synthesize the materials from the in-person meeting and then post those in some way that it's possible for other people to comment, because we really do see that collective wisdom as really important to help target the best and the most productive steps forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Tim. And while we're talking about uncertainty, I'm going to continue on with a related question. I do not know of a coastal wetland restoration project that can prove permanence and sustainability given sea level rise predictions over 100 years, as required by VERA, ACR, and most other standards. How is this going to be addressed? And someone even writes in, excellent question. I will second that. Tim, do you want to continue with that train of thought?
Yeah, so is this Rob's question there?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's being considered in the VM33 update, and this is something that's been has been engaged or been taken up more in some of the Australian approaches as well, is the opportunity of using numerical modelling and future without action, and so comparisons there. And so, I mean, that seems to be one window of reframing the conversation. We also talked about, I mentioned lateral flux before, and erosion of emergent marsh. So currently the assumptions are that all of that goes immediately to the atmosphere, whereas we know it doesn't. There's a lot of lateral flux there, but the way that the current permanence is considered is that it is a permanent piece of land that's sticking up out of the water. So whereas that carbon can may well be in the system. So I think part of it is, and that's some of the important conversations to have up front, is which of those conversations could help to reframe the conversation of permanence, which was designed for carbon calculations in forests where 100 years is a short period of time. We need to reframe the discussion, and this is the critical need of the science. I think of all of these discussions that are going on for our coastal wetlands, what is an appropriate frame to think about carbon for these wetlands? Of course, using the science thinking that is there and the methodologies that are developed, but really sort of having a little bit more open set as to the world of opportunities to legitimately quantify carbon and think about what permanent means in these wetlands, because we know they're very dynamic. That's the first thing that's said about these systems in any ecology text or manuscript. So it's definitely going to take some thinking as to how to apply new and developed methodologies and updated methodologies in a way that's going to potentially meet the needs of the state and others in terms of carbon crediting.
Okay, great, thank you.
Tim, if I could build on that real quick.
Do I see Jonathan with a hand up?
Yes, you do, Hillary. Tim and I have been discussing this at length amongst other folks at the Water Institute. Another thing to think about is more of a spatial scale kind of thing, because a lot of these projects are looking at an overall resilience for the coast. And so there's some synergies there that we could look at if you look at it on a more programmatic level than a project by project level. So there's there are a couple different ways to approach it, either the temporal scale, spatial scale, and et cetera. But as Tim was saying, these are discussions where we're trying to identify these critical data gaps, and then tie that into the policy and in the overall arc of CPRA's mission here.
Great, thank you. I've got another question here. Are there major industries that are participating or interested in participating in this effort? Tim or anyone else want to jump in here?
Andy Magnan, are you still on the call? Possibly not. But if you are, you'd be welcome to respond. So I think he may have had to drop off the call, but we had representatives from the US Business Council for Sustainable Development on the call, and we participate in those discussions as well, and have also been engaged with some of the oil and gas companies and other folks that potentially would be interested in purchasing offsets or carbon credits. So absolutely, there's a valid and and strong interest from folks that would like to see this as a functional mechanism, and particularly in coastal Louisiana. So given the high amount of coastal infrastructure that is across the coast, I mean, this is a potential for really, a triple win that potentially supporting coastal restoration with the primary incentive that we've been talking about today, but also then protecting infrastructure, potentially providing offsets and or sellable carbon credits, and then also just supporting the other ecosystem functions and services and communities of coastal Louisiana. So, so yes, there is. I think there's some critical pieces of the legal policy and science question to even look at, to sort of get out of the gates in a sense, to be able to really, a couple of steps back from, being able to engage that conversation. But certainly some of those partners and industry are also, driving and supporting, looking into some of these questions as well. So I think it's an exciting time for coastal Louisiana, because this is something that there's a lot of interest from multiple sides to be driving in the same direction. And we, from this group, we will certainly be, reaching out to Andy Magnan and others at the US Business Council for Sustainable Development to keep them informed of progress here and see where there's opportunities for linkage. So yeah, a really important and great question. Thank you.
We've got a lot of us still on the call. Is there anyone here else who would like to chime in on that? Someone just commented, Air Products plans to drill wells in Lake Maurepas to inject 5 million tons of carbon dioxide per year, about a mile below the lake bed. Is there anyone else on the call? I'm happy to bring you in off mute who would like to chime in at this point. And I again want to remind everyone, there is a link to a mural site if you want to scroll up a little bit in your chat. This is another way to provide feedback. If you want to, oh, thank you, Laura. You can go ahead and type anything in there. We've got a couple of different headings asking for feedback and commentary. If that is a preferred means of communicating for you, go right ahead.
I did see that. Oh, Thomas, go ahead. I was going to say I saw that Thomas had added some additional comments here. I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate at all.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. And one of the things that they're doing in Australia at the moment is that you can choose two different lengths for in inverted commas permanent. So you can choose a 100-year rate or a 25-year rate, and the way that greenhouse gas multipliers are applied changes depending on the window that you choose. So you obviously have to discount more if it's a shorter time period, but it allows those calculations to be done. So I think that's in the category of things that definitely to consider, and that's partially where it comes back to the legal and policy question of what are the constraints, how set in stone is 100 years, and I mean in terms of total cost, what possibilities are there in terms of monitoring and reducing the cost of monitoring, especially out into the future years, because as I'm sure many people on this call have done feasibility assessments, of individual projects, and the monitoring costs out through 30 years are often prohibitive to even start the pathway of trying to verify a project or certify a project.
I see an additional comment here from George. He says, for the interests of this group, we maintain a 72-hour ocean forecast that includes real-time carbon flux calculation covering the entire Gulf of Mexico, and that's available at flood.lsu.edu. That sounds like an amazing resource. I'm definitely going to go check that out. Thank you for sharing, George.
And perhaps just a comment back to one of the other comments there, talking about injection of carbon dioxide. So in the spirit of, or commented before, of being as focused as possible in these discussions, there's many avenues of these discussions, and many of them are important and valuable. But for this particular working group, we're specifically focused on the potential of nature-based approaches, and what's the opportunity for coastal restoration, land-based coastal restoration in terms of carbon storage and carbon crediting.
Jim, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on what Tim just mentioned, and trying to click and move the camera screen at the same time. I think what that illustrates, the focus of this working group is maybe one of those spaces where we see a coordinating opportunity, say with the OSM work that was presented earlier, is that this, I think when we kind of kicked off this working group, it would be with its sort of original focus back in May of last year, to CPRA's needs and when thinking about CPRA's project portfolio, to Tim's point, is something like carbon capture and underground storage is sort of outside that portfolio. This may be a place where we can actually have some of these attending groups that may be better suited to consider carbon capture and underground storage, host those kind of considerations, and then have this our sort of natural habitat-based discussions be focused within this working group, and maybe that just allows for that sort of a little bit of separation of effort, obviously overlapping, because there is strong demand for that in Louisiana, and I think in some of the other Gulf states, and this even comes back to one of the earlier conversation or questions, I guess, of what's the interest from the private sector. We have seen some substantial interest in the natural feature question as well from the private sector over the past couple of years. We've been coordinating with some of the private corporate landowners in the state about trying to see if we can take existing methodologies and work up projects that they would be undertaking on their property that could qualify for some of these credits. We've run into some of the same questions that we as the state have in terms of where I think a lot of the comments that are being developed right now are really coming all together. Is that okay? Well, what do the existing accreditation frameworks allow and don't allow with regard to various activities and the rules behind them, and does that argue that okay, maybe sticking with an accreditation framework that's in existence already and well established with its rules and regulations is the best approach moving forward, or is there a place for us to really push for an amendment to some of these existing accreditation frameworks? Or even, are we looking for off ramps where we may be in a position to best try to generate a new framework, depending on, if the sideboards on the existing programs really just restrict coastal wetland or coastal ecosystem projects too much. So, a lot of the comments that we've seen right so far about confidence intervals, uncertainty, and the permanence issue are huge ones. And so, as we move forward, those are the issues that we're going to be really trying to address to be able to answer that question of, can we stay within the confines of an existing framework, or do we need to really push for something that's Gulf specific or Louisiana specific, because of just recognizing that the differences between what some of the accreditation frameworks were really set up to support versus what our needs are. And again, this is really one of the places that we're really hoping that the working group as it's put together can really help inform, both from an experiential standpoint, some of the data standpoints. I saw the comment about the confidence intervals, and so the more data that we can move into or make available to everybody, we winnow down perhaps what that 90% confidence interval looks like. And to Tim's point, maybe that leads us to less carbon being left on the table. So, there's a lot of places where there's these threads that sort of tie around, a lot of the same broad considerations that, I've just been really happy to see.
Thank you so much, Jim. And again, I want to thank CPRA for their support of this group and their willingness to invest in sort of the care and feeding of the group until it gets stood up. At this point, if there are any more questions or any more points of discussion, I want to encourage folks to either drop them in the chat or go to the mural site. It does look like we've pretty much hit the end of the questions. So at this point, I think we will go ahead and wrap up. I again want to thank everyone who is here this morning for your time and your interest in this endeavor. I'm really excited about where this community is going and looking forward to seeing everyone again in person in Tampa in just a few short weeks. Oh, someone is just asking about when the recording will be available. Jean or Laura, is somebody able to answer that?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So the recording, once we're done with this, we will post that to the SharePoint site that I mentioned earlier that you can get access to by emailing us. I'm also going to send a follow-up email to everybody who registered, and if I'm able to figure this out with some help of maybe some younger people, I will try to figure out how to get it linked into the email, but if not, we will definitely have it in that SharePoint site.
Yeah, so we'll have the recording of this meeting as well as a PDF of all of the slides, which will have the QR codes and the various email contact of all of the folks who have presented here today. And again, the email to get into that SharePoint is again in the chat, so you can pull that there. Again, I really want to thank all of our presenters for making themselves available, to everyone that's participated here today. Again, my name is Hillary Stevens. I'm with Restore America's Estuaries. If you are interested in blue carbon, I realize I should have mentioned earlier, I do have a monthly newsletter that I send out called the Blue Carbon Buzz. And if you are interested in learning about what's going on in the blue carbon world, and especially in terms of publications, events, and news, please let me know. I'm happy to put you on that. Similarly, if you have publications you are putting out that you would like to get out to the wider community, please go ahead and send them my way, and I will see to it that they get put in the newsletter. Again, quick reminder, if you want to attend the event in February at GomCon in Tampa, please do go to the Gulf of Mexico Alliance website and look for registration info there. It sounds like you might be able to register just to attend on Monday, or if you are planning to be there for the whole event, there's going to be some great blue carbon stuff going on throughout the week, as well as all kinds of other really interesting things. I highly encourage you to look at the full agenda. Lots going on there, and I look forward to seeing you then. Again, huge thanks to CPRA, all the good folks at the Water Institute, and everyone who presented here today. Thanks for your time, and I think we'll be wrapping up, and we'll see you next month in Tampa.